Hi, Kristina. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Michelle.
So good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
So, for everybody listening, one of the reasons why I really wanted Kristina to come on the show and talk about her story was because she's dealt with some things that most of us have not gone through, and that is the loss of a spouse and having to raise a small child on her own at a very young age. She has not only gone through this experience, but she's gotten to the other side. She has such a zest for life. She really is living life to the fullest. She is just this ball of energy, and I just adore her. There's so much wisdom that she can bring just in telling her story of how you go through such a traumatic experience and not lose your zest for life. Before we get into having Christina tell her backstory, Christina, I'm going to start where I start with everybody who comes on the show and ask you the following question. What does it mean to you to live your extraordinary life?
For me, it means to live your life with true authenticity. It means really getting in touch with yourself. I think a lot of us sometimes aren't even in touch with ourselves, with who we really are. So the first step is really getting in touch with who we are, what we want in our life, what's important to us, and being able to live that with authenticity and to have the courage to not worry about what other people think about how we are conducting our lives and how we're living our best life with our family. And because I think too many of us, if we really think about it, we make a lot of our decisions based on what other people think. We're worried about what they think, and we do what we think they would want us to do instead of doing what's best for us.
Oh, so true.
It's also learning how to be resilient.
I love that answer because as we go through this journey of life, stepping into authenticity, part of the journey, really stepping into purpose, that's a game changer from good to great. That's when you're experiencing life at highest level in the fullest, right?
Yeah. I read a lot of self-help books and dived into psychology in my mid-20s and really was trying to learn how to live my best life then, and met my husband when I was in my early 30s, and it was unconventional because he was 24 years older than me. And so that first step of living my life with authenticity was choosing to marry him. And we just both knew that we were meant to be together. It was rather unconventional, and he'd never been married before either. And that was the first time that I said, I'm doing what's best for me. I know this is the right decision. This is my soulmate. He's a lot older. A lot of people may not approve of this decision, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Did you find though that people were like counseling you not to or saying, "Are you sure?" Were you getting that pushback from people around you?
Interestingly enough, not. And what I say a lot now is looking back on it, I feel that when you really step 100% into your authentic self, people sense it
Mm.
on some kind of level. They sense it. I was never even aggressive about it. I would just say, this is my husband. And I wouldn't explain. I wouldn't be like, well, he's a lot older and this is why. And then there was no explanation. And I think people with both of us sensed that this was the real deal. This was a true, loving, and wonderful relationship. And I cannot recall one time that anyone questioned me on
That's
that.
impressive. Not even your parents.
Interestingly enough, very early on, he and I resonated so well together. We clicked right away that things moved really fast. Which again, they always say, don't go through a relationship fast. Like, we got engaged in 2 months, and the experts say
Wow.
never do that. And I was working really long hours in finance at that time. I was actually working that weekend. So he went up to Canada by himself to meet my family. And that was the only time that I got anyone's opinion because my parents know me really, really well. And I do have a great relationship with them. But yeah, he went up and met them and they said, we get it. We get it. This is
Wow.
one,
That's
three.
incredible.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward a little because you got married
Yep.
and you started trying to have a family.
Mhm.
What happened next?
Yeah. So it didn't happen. And we actually ended up going through extensive fertility treatment. So 4 years after we were married, our son was born. Our son was about 5 when my husband was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease.
Mm. And then you began a period of what it was like a dozen years of caring for him.
Correct. Correct.
And so you weren't married for that long before all this stuff starts to happen medically.
Mhm.
You were living a really good life together. And then you get this devastating news. How do you react to something like this? I can imagine being distraught. How do you not stay stuck there? Tell us a little bit about that
Yeah,
experience.
that's a good point. So I think, to be completely honest, the first thing was denial. And denial is a coping mechanism. And I think that denial sometimes is a survival mechanism, and it's okay. It's okay to have some denial in a situation like this. So for a while, I tried to just shove it down and keep living the best life. But of course, you start to worry and you start worrying about the future. So we were living in a small town in Oregon, which was a wonderful place to raise our child. But I asked my husband if we could move to a small town near the Canadian border. My parents live right across the Canadian border. So they were going to be about a 40-minute drive. And I knew that I was going to need support. So my husband said yes. And we moved to this little town. Having support around you, making sure that you have good, solid support can really, really help with your resiliency. Because, for example, when we lived in that little town, I was having a knee problem. I ended up getting an MRI and there was a mass in my knee. And the surgeon said, I don't know what this is. We need to get it out. So he scheduled the surgery for 3 days later. Friday, July 13th, which was my birthday. I was in my 40s. I almost lost it because my husband couldn't understand anything. He couldn't retain any memories. So if I told
Right.
him I couldn't use him as a support system, I was terrified. I was beyond terrified. And I called up my father, who is just really a strong man of faith and comfort. And I told him everything. And I said, can you please come down? Thank goodness he was retired, but can you please come down today and spend the next few nights with me and my
Right.
husband and my son? Because my husband couldn't comfort me. He couldn't be there for me. And I think that you have to have that. People talk about resiliency. And I think a big part of resiliency is asking for the help that you need when you need it.
Mm.
So I really almost demanded help from my dad. He came down, and this is the other really cool part of the story, Michelle, is that the morning of my surgery, you know how you're sitting in like kind of a waiting room and they've got an IV going and
Yeah.
you're next for surgery. And I'm sitting in there with my dad and I already knew what I needed to be resilient in this process. So it's knowing what you need and asking for it. So my surgeon came in and sat down and said, okay, we're getting ready. How are you doing? And I said, I'm okay. I said, but I have a special request. I would like when we go into the operating room, right before you put me under, if we could all hold hands and I want to say a prayer. And he said, great. And he said, you want to say one right now with me? I'll say a prayer with you. And I'm like, Really? So he grabs my hands and he just says this really powerful prayer. And he says, and Lord Jesus, we just know that Christina will be seeing double black diamonds by Christmas.
I love it.
Yes. And so then we go into the operating room and these poor people. I mean, the anesthesiologist, the nurse, there's like four of us. We're in a circle, like I'm lying down and holding hands. And I say a prayer, just asking God to watch over these wonderful people. And I give a prayer of thanks, saying, thank you, God, for these wonderful people who are helping me today. And next thing I know, I'm waking up. And sure enough, by Christmas, I was seeing those double black diamonds.
Oh, I love that. That's phenomenal. So you said something very powerful for me, and that was living your extraordinary life isn't being free of tragedy and free of stress and free of the things that are going to happen in life. That's part of the human existence. You and I have had this conversation before, but navigating it authentically, asking for what you need, admitting when you need help. Tell me more. Obviously, your parents were such an incredible support system to you, but you were raising a small child. And I imagine you can't just put life on hold while tending to your husband. You have to raise a child. You have to do fun things. You need to be present. And all of this was really happening at a formative time for your child. So, what did you do to ensure his experiences were positive? And how did you break out of what I can imagine is the tough everyday in a lot of ways, the heaviness of the everyday, and still manage to find joy?
Well, for one thing, Michelle, I do think I was very blessed in that for most of my husband's journey, he was not one of those grumpy, combative patients. And so that was gigantic. Like, I know a lot of people have struggles with all of that part of it. And my husband was very agreeable. So, especially for the first few years, even though his memory wasn't there, that was just our normal, my son's normal. He almost didn't remember anything different other than helping his dad, heat up something in the microwave for lunch. Like
Right.
that was just our
It's
normal
just
life.
being helpful, right?
Yep, yep. And dad forgets things and dad would come along with us and we deliberately chose a home in a cul-de-sac. We looked and looked and looked for a home in this wonderful little town called Bellingham near the Canadian border. And we finally found the right home when we pulled into a cul-de-sac that was full of 14 children. And
Um,
so that was our house. It wasn't the most beautiful. It was not even a very large house. It was quite small. It wasn't glamorous, but it was our home and became the Kool-Aid mom. I had 14 kids in my house most days. My furniture was deliberately old so that they could build forts. We did campfires in the backyard. We had a fire pit. We roasted marshmallows and hot dogs. In the summer, we slept outside under the stars. And I think because I had to wait 4 years before having my own child, I just embraced being a mom in such a big way. I never thought I would be a stay at home mom, but I was really lucky that I didn't have to work full time during this time period. So lots of adventures with all the kids. And literally, even on Christmas morning, Michelle, at about 8 a.m., the doorbell would start ringing and the kids would start coming over to play in our house because we were a place of joy. And my husband was in a place of joy too. He lived very much in the present. The other thing is that I haven't mentioned yet is that I did Oprah's book club where she had Eckhart Tolle, his book, A New Earth, and chapter by chapter, she and him broke it down and explained it. It was a 10-week thing. And I did that when my husband was first diagnosed. And I finally understood the power of now because before that, I didn't understand it. I tried to read it, didn't get it. And there's a lot of listeners out there saying, I've never understood Eckhart Tolle. If you don't understand him, go back on YouTube and watch Oprah's book club. It's her and him discussing chapter by chapter what it all means. And by the end of it, you do understand how to live in the present. As far as you're asking me how I got through this experience, it just so happened that Oprah and Eckhart were doing this book club live every week, once a week, the 10-week program. And so I knew that I had to master living in the present. And that was really a big part of how I got through the whole journey.
So, in the midst of enjoying motherhood with this beautiful child and enjoying all these preschool years and all the fun that's happening, and he's growing up healthy and all of this, the same time, your husband's in decline and you're watching this transpire. So, there has to be this complete tug at your heart of it's hard to be happy when this is happening and I'm losing him. And
Mhm.
at the same time, I am experiencing happiness and joy as a mother, watching
Yeah.
my child
Yeah.
thrive.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So there's a bit of compartmentalizing in that. I have a friend who's going through the Alzheimer's journey with her husband right now. And
Mm.
she's doing the same thing. And, she'll ask me, like, I want to go out to lunch with my friends and I just want to forget about everything for a while. And is that okay? And I said, yeah, that's a coping mechanism. And that's what I did as well. And it works really, really well. So it's an opportunity to take a break from always thinking about the future and just an
Yeah.
opportunity to be normal. Like you're out with your,
Talk about something else other
yeah,
than his declining
yeah.
health.
Yeah, yeah. So out with other moms and our kids and just being a mom. And I just told a lot of people, I don't, unless I bring it up, if I want to talk about it, I will. But otherwise, this isn't my mental break. This is an opportunity for me to just be a mom right now.
And out with your girlfriends.
Yep. Mhm.
Out with your girlfriends. So you were doing things to take care of your mind, your spirit, and your body during this entire process, which I think is quite frankly nothing short of miraculous because I think it's easier to cave into the negative thoughts and the negative feelings, which is why I really wanted to share your story because I do think a lot of people can relate to the loss and to going through trauma, whether it's a spouse or the loss of a child, how traumatic and the upheaval that goes along with that.
And I want to interject also that I was in therapy the entire time. And I have an incredibly strong faith. I just really, really believed that God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, would help me. All I had to do was ask. So when we lived in Bellingham, we attended a church there, and the minister was also a licensed therapist. And I ended up seeing him every Friday. He was an elderly man, very wise. And he helped me so, so much. He has since passed away. I wish he could hear this interview. He passed away a few years back, but I think that therapy was gigantic for me. And I think that my faith was huge because and maybe the therapists helped me with this too, but I just always knew that there are no accidents, that this was my spiritual journey and that God gave this to me, that this was meant to be a blessing to me to learn and grow from. And that was the place that I came from. Was I there every day? Heck no. But I really tried.
I think I would have been stuck in a pity party zone for a while, for sure. I draw this great deal of strength from listening to how it unfolded. And the key for me was you never denied that you were vulnerable and you asked for help when you needed it.
Really did. I really did. I'm gonna confess something that I don't know if almost anyone knows, but I'm gonna tell
Mm.
you this story right now, really. I wanna be vulnerable for people who think of how terrified and scared you could be because I you just have this gigantic future ahead of you, and you have a 5-year-old and you have a husband who's gonna die of Alzheimer's disease. And so I remember I was so anxious that one day I literally walked into the emergency room in my little town of Eugene, Oregon, and my friend's husband is an ER doctor there. And to my shame and humiliation, he was on duty. But I remember sitting on the bed with the curtain drawn, and he popped his head in. He couldn't work with me because I was friends with his wife. So he popped his head in to me and he smiled and he said, something like, "It's okay that you're here. I kind of thought at some point you might be here because what you are going through is one of the hardest things that any human being will ever have to go through. And I'm really glad you're here and we're going to help you get through this. And he didn't judge me for falling apart that day. And I got the medical help that I needed. I was referred to a doctor who prescribed some medication, and that's part of my journey too. And that's okay. And again, that comes down to the resilience to do what I needed to do to get through this.
Well, Christina, first of all, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. I'm tearing up, if you can tell.
I am too.
Part of this podcast is not only talking about all the great things we've experienced, but also how we've coped with those more trying times to get to the other side. Because, one of the
Yeah.
things I don't want to sugarcoat is like living your extraordinary life does not mean every day is a sunshiny, wonderful day. It is how do you live life to the fullest with whatever the cards are that you're dealt.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Again, getting back to resiliency looks a lot of different ways. For me, that day, resiliency looked like going into the ER room, getting some medication, including sleeping medication, because I wasn't sleeping hardly at all. And then being able to feel so much better and be a great mom and help my husband. It's okay to get help so that you can help other people too. And I'm not ashamed and embarrassed about it. I got help. I want to encourage other people. I did therapy. I went to doctors. That's part of resiliency, figuring out what you need to do and doing it.
Well, I think a lot of people that will hear this interview, they'll recall this story and say, I remember what Christina went through.
And I'm
Yeah.
here,
And she's not
and I'm
only
happy.
here,
Have an amazing life.
very happy and living an amazing life. And we're going to get into that because it's an important part of the story is not getting stuck in this place because obviously life goes on and really helping people understand that you can go through this very traumatic experience, a grieving process, but there is hope that life gets better over time.
One other thing I want to mention too is I was really blessed. One of my dearest girlfriends in Eugene, Oregon, who's still one of my dearest friends, right around the time my husband was diagnosed, her husband was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, and her son was around the same age as my son. And so we went through the journey together. It was interesting because her husband had 100% physical deterioration, but his mind stayed clear. And my husband had no physical deterioration, but his mind was going. So, it was a different issue, but it was the same result that there's no cure. There's no medicine to help it. And they both result in death. And so we to this day are very, very, very close. We talked on the phone probably almost every day if we didn't see each other. At one point she was falling apart and I flew down to California for a few days because she needed me. So we go through all of these things and the thing that we both came out of it, which I want our listeners to hear, is that we would look around the world at everybody else and all the busyness, and we would say to ourselves, life is short. You cannot just assume that you have 90 years on this planet. If you want to go to Disneyland with your family, you'd better do it now. We stopped taking time for granted. Yeah, if you look at the Facebook pages of me and my friends back at that time period, you will see us doing things with our husbands for as long as we could. Like in her case, her husband in a wheelchair, me with my husband just on my arm because he just wanted to be close to me because he was disoriented, but still taking trips and still above all visiting family, like literally flying across the country to Pennsylvania or wherever your family is and spending time with those people. And to this day, we both still live that way. And even if you don't have a lot of money, you can take a weekend trip to the mountains or to a cute little town and create these amazing memories or roast marshmallows in the backyard. It doesn't have to cost a ton of money, but create those memories. Take the time, do it. And we still live that way, both of us. We still live that way. We live life to the fullest.
Let's keep going because I think what people don't know, and I want to make sure they do know, is what happens later for you? Because you went through this for a very long time. It was like 12 years that Bill was sick, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And at one point, you no longer could care for him and you
Right.
needed to put him in a care home. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision and that process?
Yes. So I consulted a psychologist who I only had a couple sessions with her. She was very, very expensive, but really that was all I needed. It was worth every penny. And she said to me, he needs to go under care because he was combative with caregivers at that time. For the most part, he was very easy, but that particular phase, anyone who came into the house to help me, he was very combative. So what was happening was he was wandering around at night and then one night, thank God my parents were actually visiting, he fell. There was a thud and it sounded awful. It's like the worst noise you will ever hear in your life. I dashed out of my bedroom. My son dashed out of his, my parents theirs. And I heard somebody screaming. Michelle, and I've been on the scene, first person on the scene of a bad accident. I am like gold. I don't lose it. I am so calm. But somebody was screaming and it was me.
Mm,
And my parents called 911 because his eyes were open, but he
he's
wasn't
not
responding.
responsive. Yeah.
So they whisked him off in the ambulance. And um, when my son fell back asleep in the middle of the night, I called a Christian prayer hotline and had them pray with me for about 15, 20 minutes. So just getting really real here about some of the things that happened.
But this
So,
is what I love about you because you're willing to share these very vulnerable moments. Of course, you weren't going to go back to sleep at that point. Your husband's off in a hospital setting. Your child's seen what's happened. You are in this state of terror and you need to get back to a place of equilibrium.
and even the ambulance people, he came to when they were there and they were like, okay, they could tell like he was stable. He's like, we're keeping a sharp eye on him. So please do not come to the hospital. Like it's only a few hours. They said, we'll call you if anything changes, but he's stable. Please go back to bed and get some rest. So that was when I sought out the therapist and went and talked to her, and she explained to me that he definitely needs to be in a safer environment. And I said, "But how do I explain that to my son?" And she said, "Well, here's the thing. If you tell your son beforehand and say, 'Hey, tomorrow dad is going in a care home. Don't tell dad.' He's going to feel like he's betraying his dad.
Mm.
Then if he turns around and tells his dad, 'Dad, mom said she's putting you in a care home tomorrow,' then he's betraying mom. So either way, he loses." So she said, "The only way you're going to do this is he's going to go to school. You're going to take your husband to the care home, and your son's going to come home, and you're going to have to explain it to him."
After the
Mhm.
fact. Yeah.
After the fact. So again, I called down my father, who is almost 90 and still alive to this day and very much Sprite and everything, but he came down because he was born in a little country called Estonia, grew up in 4 different countries, went to school, learned 4 different languages, came to Canada at age 17, became a chemical engineer. Very, very powerful man who's accomplished a lot in his life. So he came down, and when my son came home from school, he sat my son down, we told him, and my son began to cry, and my father said, "I lived during World War II. I had to move around. My father was in the war. He fought on different sides of the war at different times. There was no internet, no cell. I didn't know where my father was for years on at a time. He essentially grew up without his father because his father was fighting in the war. So his father came back into his life when he was 14. And he said, I grew up without a father and I'm okay. And you're going to be just fine too. And to this day, my son says, I'm the most like grandpa. I am a lot like grandpa. That's what he says.
Yes. And Christina's son is now 19, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
He's not fully grown up. He's still a kid in my eyes, but,
Yes.
he's thriving. He's
He's
currently
thriving.
having a gap year before going off to college. He's traveling. He's having the time of his life. This kid has gone through a lot and losing his father at an early age. And he got through it and he's doing fabulously.
He's actually just completed one of his goals. He drove all the way up to north of Fairbanks to see the Northern Lights. And then he drove from Alaska all the way to Florida, sleeping in sleeping bags in his car, in campgrounds, and just living life to the fullest. He's wow, that kid.
You had to endure this prolonged traumatic event. I want to say a 12-year period, right?
Yes.
It's a long time to be experiencing trauma. It's a really long time.
Yep.
And yet, we're on the other side.
We are.
Will's is doing fabulous. He's going to go off to college in the fall.
Yeah, he's already been accepted to his dream school, so we're good.
Fabulous. He's traveling around the world as he should right now as a youngster. And you are recently remarried and
Correct.
just this past summer. So you're still a newlywed. So tell us about how you met Blake, your now husband, and where you're at now in life.
Okay, I do have to tell you one magical thing about that appointment, which relates to Blake.
Please do.
With the PhD psychologist, unbeknownst to me, when I met Blake, my now husband, he showed me where he worked. He's a chemical engineer, right? It's in Seattle. Seattle's a huge city, millions of people. So when I was in my therapy session, right across the street from me was my future husband working in his office. I'm not
Right
kidding.
across the street of all the places he
Right,
could be working.
right. Of all the places of 3 million people in Seattle, he was right across the street. It just wasn't time for me to meet him yet.
That's incredible. But how long after Bill passing away did you even meet Blake?
So I actually met Blake before Bill passed away.
That's right. This is an incredibly amazing part of the story. Why don't you
It
fill
is,
our
it
listeners
is,
in?
it is amazing. So I had probably 7 years of really being a caregiver to Bill. Bill had gone under care. I was a mom. And I kind of hit a low because my son was a teenager. He was, spending more time with his friends as they should. And I knew that. I wasn't one of those moms that was like, stay home with me. I'm lonely. So, I was like, go be with your friends. But I, I was getting lonely and we had moved to a suburb of Seattle because my husband comes from a big, very close family, wonderful family. And my husband knew that he wanted to be close to his family. And he was already losing words in Bellingham. And he said to me, I want to be near my people. And he would say it even not as well as that, but he wanted to be by his people. So we moved really close to a lot of his family and they saw how sad I was. I was trying to hide it, but how can you hide that? You can't really
Mhm.
hide it. So they just one night we were out for dinner and they said to me, I think my son was out with his teenage friends. And they said to me, "Are you dating?" And I said, "No." And they said, Bill's 24 years older than you. You're very young. Like, I was in my 40s and you've been sad, like we see the sadness and you try to hide it, but we're concerned and we know that Bill would have wanted you to move forward. And actually, Bill did have a conversation with me even before Alzheimer's that he said, I'm a lot older than you. I want you to live your life to the fullest after whatever happens with me. And I know you're going to get remarried again. I just know it in my heart. And I didn't like that. I was very angry and I cried when he said that. I said, I don't want to talk about it. He said, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I want you to live your life to the fullest. And so he'd given me the permission, but I just couldn't do it. So his family said to me, please try to find a companion because you're lonely and we want you to be happy and Bill would want you to be happy. So, and literally all my friends, everyone was saying this around me. And so finally, one of my friends sat me down, wrote out a match profile. Believe it or not, in Seattle, that's how people meet the most is through Match because it rains and everybody stays in their houses all winter. So
That's what
everybody
you all say. And then I hear it's the most beautiful place. We just tell
in the
everybody it rains. So
summer,
you all
in the
stay
summer,
away.
just come in the summer. That's when it's nice. So yeah, so I was 100% honest, and I didn't think anyone would reach out to me because my story was, I'm married, I'm not getting divorced. I visit my husband almost every day in a care home, but I'm looking for a companion, to go out to dinner with and go to movies and plays and hike and do things with. And that's how I met Blake. And recently I asked him, like, how did you pick me? Like, how did you, reach out to me? And I said, what was it about me? And he said, "Y- your authenticity. He said, you're real. You were 100% truthful. You just put yourself out there. You were so vulnerable. That's a really good person," he
Ah,
said.
well, the maturity it was there for Blake. So kudos to Blake for having that level of maturity. Because I don't know that everybody gets there. Some people just don't. But also for you in the dating scene, particularly online, I think that there's a huge problem with people misrepresenting themselves, right? Like that's
It is.
often the
Yeah.
case. But here you go out and you say, all right, this isn't the rosiest of situations. I'm married.
Yeah.
I have a husband that I'm not going to divorce. I still love him very much, but he happens to be in a care home. And I would like to have a companion and start dating again. And Blake is not the only person that responded to that, I should note. You did get a lot of people wanting to go out and meet you because you're beautiful and you're incredibly authentic and down to earth. So that doesn't surprise me. But I think that you being so grounded and aligned with who you are and what you wanted is what attracts people to you. There is such a
Yeah, I was
bright
I
light
was
around
surprised.
you.
Like, I was surprised too. Like, there definitely was not a problem with having, dates or meeting people and that kind of a thing. But again, I think it gets back to your thing where I think with online dating, there's a lot of people that aren't authentic. So when you come across someone who really is, it's very appealing.
And disarming. Because people
Mhm.
expect people to
Disarming.
actually build themselves up and put the best picture out there, but for you to go like, "Here's the situation," you know?
And Blake is such an amazing human being because not only did he decide to start a relationship with me, which was a very brave thing to do with a person like me, knowing that there would be heartache along the way and
That you
confusion and
weren't always
difficult.
gonna be available because you were still married.
Exactly. Yeah. But, I cannot sometimes it just makes me cry thinking about it, but he would even come with me to the care home to visit Bill. And there was one time because Bill didn't recognize me anymore. And that was part of why his family told me to move forward too. They said, you're not going to hurt his feelings. He doesn't know you anymore.
Mm.
So Blake and I were sitting with Bill and then trying to have a conversation. And Bill looked at me and looked at Blake and pointed. And he said, you and you good together. What he
Oh,
said.
okay, now I'm really gonna cry because this feels like a
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know
It-
that part of their story. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. I didn't know
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
So you got
Yeah.
Bill's blessing.
We got his blessing. And I don't know whether he knew it was me at that moment because with Alzheimer's, sometimes they can go in and out of how much awareness they had. But knowing Bill, if he was aware, it was his blessing. And if he wasn't aware, if we were just a couple, he was a very kind hearted person. So that was Bill. That was Bill's essence, where he would say, you guys make a great couple. He was a guy who would say stuff like that. You guys are good together. And that's what he was trying to tell us. And
Right.
so whether he knew if it was me or not, either way, it was him and it was authentic.
So fast forward 2022.
Here we go.
You're married. You married Blake.
Happened.
Beautiful wedding, all the family. I mean, how exciting. You're in this new
Yeah.
chapter of life. And I
Mhm.
think, if we haven't hit it enough over the head, what we really want to convey in bringing Christina's story to life is the importance of being true to yourself, the importance of really stepping into your authenticity, the incredible importance of taking care of yourself and knowing what your needs are and not being afraid to ask for what you need. Because I could imagine, had you not done all the work, quite frankly, you might not have been in a place where you could have ever met Blake. Or quite frankly, Will's might not be thriving the way he is today. So I think there is so many important lessons to be learned in your story of going through what was not just a 1 year battle with a disease, but a decade plus experience that was filled with trauma and filled with grief. And at the same time, had joy and happiness woven in it because you worked at it,
Yeah.
which
And what just popped in my head right now that I think is so important for those who are listening who are in a caregiver position, maybe somewhat like I was in, I didn't beat myself up over the fact that I wasn't achieving in all the external ways at that time for 12 years. I was focusing on raising my child, taking great care of my husband, and trying to maintain a happy life. But I didn't have the bandwidth at that time to do some things that people would consider external achievement, like making great amounts of money and having a fancy job and a fancy car and all of that stuff. And, now that I just got remarried and my son has graduated, it's finally my turn and it's my chapter in life. And I had to overcome some fear too and become brave just to decide, what do I want to do with my life now? And the answer that came to me was podcasting to help other women in particular. But I just want to say to those of you who are maybe in that phase of life where I was at, if you looked on the outside, I didn't worry about what other people thought. So what? I'm not a CEO of a company. I'm basically a stay-at-home mom who manages some investments for our family, and I'm doing the best I can. And that's okay. I had 12 years of that, and now it's my turn to shine my light. And
I love that. I love that. And hopefully folks caught this, but if not, please go check out Christina's She's Brave podcast on Apple and Spotify. And we'll have the links in the show notes. It was so much fun. And we are kindred spirits. So I feel like we've known each other forever and a day. But it's just like this conversation. I think there was just a lot of wisdom and a lot of magic revealed in the course of our dialogue. So I hope that you'll go check it out from, I believe it dropped. Is
January
there?
2nd, which
Oh,
is my late
January
husband's
2nd. That's right.
birthday. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
January 2nd, very important anniversary because it was Bill's birthday. So happy birthday to Bill in heaven. We
Yes.
are all thinking of you. Christina, thank you so much for sharing your story and being here. And I really just always love talking to you because there's always so much to learn and so many facets of your life that inspire. And I really do hope that our listeners recognized all the extraordinary steps that you took to really safeguard your own mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health so that you
Mhm.
could be a good caregiver, so that you could be present for your child and to seek help when you needed it. You have indeed, my friend, lived and continue to live a very extraordinary life. And I am just so grateful to know you. Thank you for
Oh,
coming on.
thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
You really, truly are a gift and a blessing to all of us. I've heard your story now many times. I still have so much to learn from you and your wisdom and your brave moves in life. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please comment, like, and subscribe to this channel to continue to receive content that inspires. Let us know what resonates and what you'd like to hear more about. You are here for a purpose. It's time for you to step into that purpose, become the most authentic version of you, and start living, truly living your extraordinary life. It's never too late. And in fact, we're just getting started.